A daring expedition makes its way to one of the most remote places on Earth, Bikini Atoll. It's here to explore the world's most extraordinary ship graveyard.
60 feet, 60 feet.
Giant American and Japanese warships rest side by side on the ocean floor. These once proud ships were sacrificed in one of the most spectacular experiments of all time. Now an international expedition heads to Bikini with a mission to document the legendary Ghost Fleet before it's lost forever to the ravages of time. In 1946, just after the end of World War II, the world faced a new threat, the atom bomb.
It has been said that any reasonably industrialized nation can produce the atom bomb in a few years. I know that you would not want your homes protected by a military machine, obsolete and inadequate to meet the dangers of any form of attack.
The United States government quickly decided to respond to the new threat. Several atomic bomb tests were planned to show the world that they had a stockpile of these deadly weapons in their possession. The planners of what would be called Operation Crossroads did not take long to find the perfect testing ground. 5,000 miles off the American west coast, in the middle of the vast Pacific Ocean, they found a group of islands called the Marshall Islands, and among them, a remote atoll called Bikini. The Micronesian people settled on the atoll about 4,000 years ago. Bikini and its lagoon provided them with an overabundance of food and water. But then in 1946 came Operation Crossroads. Before the bombs could be tested, the 167 islanders who lived on Bikini would have to leave. Commodore Ben H. Wyatt was the one to break the news.
Crossroads, scene 25, take 1.
All right now, James, will you tell them that the United States government now wants to turn this great destructive force into something good for mankind?
The American generals promised the islanders that their evacuation would only be temporary. A film team made sure the world would get the right message. Newsreels of the time offered their own version of the evacuation.
American officials discussed plans with the Bikini natives for the evacuation of the atoll. The islanders are a nomadic group and are well pleased that the Yanks are going to add a little variety to their lives.
The Bikinians left without knowing when they would return. Now a team of scientists has come to Bikini on board the expedition vessel My Octopus. Led by naval historian Steve Wiper, the expedition wants to explore the legacy of Operation Crossroads.
The wrecks at Bikini are very important to naval enthusiasts like myself. Because of the variation of wrecks that are here, it is probably one of the best selections in the world.
Accompanying Steve Wiper on the expedition are radiation expert Klaus Bunnenberg, who's here to determine if Bikini is still radioactively contaminated. Marine biologist Louise Rocha, here to investigate what effects the test's nuclear fallout may have had on marine wildlife. And Jim Ackroyd, a daring diver, for whom the wrecks at Bikini pose a risky challenge. The team has the latest high-tech equipment at their disposal. The Pagoo, a state-of-the-art submersible designed to hold 8 passengers. For the first time ever, a manned submersible will survey ships that were sunk by an atomic bomb. The team is also supported by this remotely operated underwater vehicle, or ROV. Its integrated high-definition camera and robotic arms allow the team to examine areas too hazardous for humans. The Bikinians had barely left in 1946 when Operation Crossroads Task Force 1 descended on their atoll.
There were approximately 42,000 personnel involved in this operation. There were approximately 240 to 250 ships involved in the operation.
Officially, Crossroads was necessary to test the effects of the new weapon. But behind the scenes, much was owed to a military power struggle over funding.
The Army Air Force stated that they could destroy a Navy using nuclear weapons. Therefore, why did the United States need a Navy anymore?
To settle the argument, a test fleet of 95 ships representing the US Navy's various naval designs was assembled at Bikini. Among them, some of the most famous ships of their time. The USS Saratoga. Originally designed as a battle cruiser, Saratoga was later refitted as an aircraft carrier. With a flight deck 888 feet long and a weight of 43,500 tons when fully loaded, it was the biggest warship of its time. And several enemy ships captured during World War II were also part of the target fleet. The Nagato was the flagship of the Imperial Japanese Navy until 1942. It was one of the most powerful ships of World War II and became famous for its role in the Japanese surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Would these giant vessels be able to withstand the destructive powers of an atomic bomb blast? On board the My Octopus, the expert team is about to descend the ghost fleet of Bikini. Few have ever seen it in person. After decades of rusting on the lagoon floor, some of the shipwrecks have begun to collapse. Naval historian Steve Wiper is anxious to see the extent of their deterioration. To monitor the team's safety, radioecologist Klaus Bunnenberg will join Steve and assess the underwater radiation levels. He wants to determine if nuclear fallout from Operation Crossroads still poses a threat to the divers and a manned submersible. The Pagoo is a high-tech submersible that can stay submerged for up to 8 hours, a huge advantage for Steve Wiper's team. 10 ships are lying on the bottom of Bikini Lagoon in an area of just a few square miles. To find them, the Pagoo has to descend 180 feet into the dark void. The fleet that was assembled for Operation Crossroads was the 5th largest fleet in the world at that time. It was made up of battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and aircraft carriers.
Wow, so cool.
Many of them were warships and still operational until they arrived at Bikini Atoll. They survived the battles of World War II, but were then sacrificed as test objects by their own military.
It's almost like you're trying to quietly tiptoe through a cemetery without disturbing anything. It is eerie.
But the ships of the Ghost Fleet were not the only test objects used during Operation Crossroads. To measure the effect of a nuclear blast on a ship's crew, goats, sheep, rats, and pigs were placed on board the target vessels. To guarantee that the world would be impressed by their atomic test, the military made certain it was well documented. Half the world's available film stock was brought to Bikini. 750 motion picture and still cameras were operated from the island, from support ships and from airplanes. They were to deliver impressive images to the world as quickly and clearly as possible.
The United States was the only country on the planet at that time that had nuclear weapons. I think they wanted to prove that they had more than just a few nuclear weapons, and they wanted other nations to realize that by putting on a big show, that they had a lot more weapons than some people thought.
On July the 1st, 1946, all signs were set to go for the first atomic test, codenamed Able, to begin. The bomb had the same destructive power as the weapon dropped on the Japanese city Nagasaki a year earlier.
Ladies and gentlemen, today is Able Day, the day that the fourth atomic bomb ever dropped in history is scheduled to explode over a ghost fleet in Bikini Lagoon. In just a few moments, the superfortress carrying that bomb will take off from Kwajalein to begin a 4-hour flight to H-hour.
It would be the first atomic bomb to ever explode in peacetime.
9, all green. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3,
The bomb did not go into the center of the fleet where it was designed to go. And as terrific as the explosion was, it turned out to be kind of a flop because very few ships were sunk from that. And leading up to that, the hype and propaganda had led everybody to believe that the fleet was going to be virtually wiped out by this one weapon.
But few of the large, well-known ships had sunk. The disappointment was enormous, especially for the Air Force, who had hoped for much more spectacular results.
The National Broadcasting Company interrupts all its programs to bring you a special broadcast.
A few hours ago, the atomic bomb was dropped on the target fleet at Bikini. It was a successful experiment, says the Army and Navy, but from 20 miles away, it was a pretty poor spectacle.
Distracted by this public relations disaster, nobody paid attention to an invisible form of destruction set loose by the nuclear explosion: atomic radiation. Physicist Klaus Bunnenberg wants to find out whether Bikini Lagoon is still radioactively contaminated. He's concerned that the diving crew could be exposed to dangerous radioactivity. To safely take a sample from the lagoon sediment, he needs the help of the underwater robot. The ROV is operated from a control room inside the Octopus. Here, a team of technicians is in charge of safely steering it through the underwater world and operating its arms and camera. Two of the most hazardous elements released by an atomic bomb are plutonium and cesium-137. During the bomb tests of Operation Crossroads, both elements rained down on the target fleet and the ocean, and then sank to the lagoon floor. If they've stuck to the lagoon sediment, they'll pose a serious threat to Steve Weiper's diving crew. The highly radioactive plutonium has a half-life of 24,000 years and can be deadly in even tiny amounts. It would be a dangerous legacy of an experiment many underestimated in its destructive power.
It's got the right eyeball. Right. You get an idea how much I want to force into the lens.
In 1946, while the US military struggled with their test results, a different kind of atom bomb hysteria broke out in Paris. On the heels of the tests, fashion designer Louis Réal introduced his own explosion, a two-piece bathing suit he called the Bikini. Back on Bikini Atoll, the generals were under immense pressure to create a more impressive spectacle for their second bomb test. To emphasize their good intentions, King Judah, leader of the Bikinian people, was invited to watch. The second test was codenamed Baker, and it had to be a success. Engineers concluded that heavily built warships would be difficult to sink unless they sustained underwater damage. So this time, the bomb was suspended from a landing craft and hung 90 feet below the waterline. The explosion was enormous. It created a column of water and debris that rose 7,600 feet into the air and then crashed back down onto the target fleet. 6 vessels sank almost immediately. 3 more sank within the next couple of hours and days. The ship from which the bomb had been suspended had simply vanished. The military finally had their spectacle. Still, many of the ships did not sink and appeared to be undamaged. Just days after the detonation, military crews reboarded and began the cleanup, underestimating a deadly menace: radiation. Within the first hour after the detonation, radiation levels had reached up to 8,000 Röntgen, 20 times the deadly dosage. Nobody would have survived the shockwave, debris, and tidal waves sweeping across the ships. And even if they had, radiation levels would have ended all life on board within 60 seconds of the detonation.
The military believed that the ships could be decontaminated and remanned. So they were sending their personnel back aboard the ships and were instructing them to scrub the ships down, but unfortunately to no avail. The scientists were trying to tell the military that the ships were too radioactive, as much as 50 times the daily dosage. But the military wanted to prove that these ships were still operational.
A decision for which many servicemen still pay a high price today. David Jordan was only 18 years old when his first mission in the Navy brought him to Bikini Atoll. After the explosions, it was his job to clean the small boats that had entered the radioactive lagoon to inspect the target fleet.
We wasn't issued anything, nothing. We just everyday clothes and a pair of rubber gloves, and that was it. So we was exposed pretty heavy, you know. And it's amazing, I didn't have any kind of physical problems until about 1998. That's when I first began to have problems, skin disorders, and which I call skin disorder, and turned out to be skin cancer. And then, of course, now it's gotten to be a lot worse type cancer now. I'm dealing with 3 different types of cancer.
Many of David's comrades suffered similar problems and died as a consequence. To this day, the Department of Veterans Affairs is denying any correlation between Operation Crossroads and David's disease.
The VA don't want to admit, or hadn't admitted, that either type cancer has been caused or could be caused from ionizing radiation. They won't admit that. They haven't yet.
On board the My Octopus, physicist Klaus Bunnenberg wants to find out if the hazardous substances David Jordan was exposed to in 1946 are still lurking in the lagoon today. With the help of the underwater robot, he's collected a sample of lagoon sediment and checks it for radiation.
I found that there is not much radioactivity in this sample. Of course, a more precise result will have to follow from a laboratory analysis, but I can say that this sample is not heavily radioactive.
The bottom of the lagoon is safe, but what about the wrecks themselves? Diver Jim Ackroyd has volunteered to take a radiation dosimeter into one of the wrecks to find out.
Close it watertight. To put it on somewhere.
In this position here?
Yes, that's fine.
That's
this
okay.
is fine. Yes.
Naval historian Steve Wiper has chosen the goal for this dive mission: the legendary American aircraft carrier USS Saratoga. Saratoga was a target of several kamikaze attacks during World War II. Though heavily damaged, the ship survived. But new naval designs had made the carrier obsolete, and it was chosen to be part of the test fleet at Operation Crossroads.
Roger, cleared open vents and dive. Diving now, diving now.
As the Pagoo approaches the wreck, Steve spots one of Saratoga's warplanes, armed with ammunition.
They wanted to test what would happen to the ordnance, the fuels, and things like that. And, you know, they've even had aircraft on the deck of Saratoga that were fully fueled, fully armed. And, you know, they wanted to know the results of what would happen with an atomic test.
The effects the Baker bomb had on the gigantic carrier was staggering. The bomb blast generated a series of tidal waves, sweeping away the airplanes and equipment stowed on deck. The carrier was damaged so heavily that it sank a mere 7.5 hours later.
So are we doing this shot for the ROV? So the deck wood?
Yes,
Was steel?
Was.
So that's why the I-beams are exposed now.
Yeah.
The wood's raw.
Let's see all the little pegs.
Today, the Saratoga wreck still sits the right way up, displaying its enormous flight deck. carrier was built to hold up to 90 aircraft at once. In the 17 years of its career, more than 98,000 landings took place on the deck of the Saratoga.
This area of the flight deck is heavily collapsed. In fact, in some areas, absolutely completely collapsed down into the ship. This area was radically weakened during the Baker test. And unfortunately, as the ship is decaying, it is collapsing down and inwards on itself at this point.
The waves crashed down on Saratoga, also heavily contaminating the ship. In 1989, the wreck was reported to still be radioactive. Due to preservation laws, no samples can be taken from the rusting steel. Inside the safe shell of the Pagoo, the radioactivity levels Klaus Bunnenberg picks up with his meter are weak. To really find out how hazardous the wreck still is, Dive Master Jim Ackroyd will have to take a second meter inside the wreck. But radioactivity is not the only hazard here. The rusting wreck has razor-sharp edges and has recently started to collapse. Any new collapse could trap the divers. And there is also still live ammunition inside the Saratoga. It's time for Jim to deliver the radiation dosimeter to the surface. The dosimeter cannot provide extensive data, but it will give physicist Klaus Bunnenberg a clue to the radioactivity levels inside the Saratoga wreck.
Okay, Klaus, so here is the test, your test dosimeter. We had 10 minutes inside the hangar, about 20 minutes on the actual flight deck.
Still the same reading.
Exactly the same reading?
0.037. That's
So
still the same reading.
Before I went
so
in.
that is quite normal. It switches about 1 digit a day, so nothing special.
Okay.
More than 60 years of radioactive decay and water streaming through the wrecks have erased significant amounts of radiation from the ship graveyard. But if the lagoon once was infested with radiation, what impact did this have on marine and island life? In the decades following Operation Crossroads, American scientists returned to Bikini numerous times to study the long-term effects of radioactivity on nature. While Bikini turned into a living laboratory for the scientists, the Bikinian people remained in exile. Today, many Bikinian families have started a new life in the United States. Springdale, Arkansas, has the largest population of Bikinians outside the Marshall Islands. Many work in the factories of the city, and they've adapted to the rhythm of their new home. But even though they're in the third and fourth generation of exile, for many Bikinians, the United States is no more than a place to live.
Where's my home? Deep down in their heart, I always said Bikini, and that's because every once in a while it pops out and just remind me and make me sad. Remind me where I'm coming from. Bikini is my home.
Along with the large Marshallese community, the Bikinians in Springdale try to keep their traditions alive as much as possible. They came here after their atoll had been made uninhabitable by nuclear fallout. Those who didn't come to the United States moved to other places in the Marshall Islands. The nation's main island, Majuro, serves as a refuge for many Bikinian families. But jobs are scarce and space limited. In the 1970s, an attempt was made to resettle Bikini. 139 people returned to the atoll, but they stayed only a few years. It's a story well known to Jack Niedenthal. For many years, he's represented the interests of the Bikinian people. He recalls the terrible discovery that was made when scientists came to check on the islanders.
So in 1978, they sent people up with whole body counters, and they did a whole body count on the Bikinians, and they discovered that these people had huge amounts of cesium in their body. And they said, okay, we don't understand why this is happening, but we're going to have to move those people off of Bikini again.
A devastating experience for the Bikini natives, banished from their home for a second time. Originally, the Bikinian families had given up their island for the 2 bomb tests of Operation Crossroads. But there were more to come. By 1958, the United States had tested 23 nuclear bombs on Bikini, climaxing with the hydrogen bomb test, codenamed Bravo. The gigantic explosion even caught the US military off guard. A miscalculation led to an explosive yield of 15 megatons, 2.5 times more powerful than they'd intended, and the equivalent of roughly 1,000 Hiroshima bombs exploding all at once. The explosion generated a fireball 4.5 miles across within a second. It was the most powerful weapon the United States ever detonated. Bravo tore an immense crater into the fragile atoll, over a mile in diameter and 250 feet deep. It covered Bikini and many of its surrounding atolls in tons of nuclear fallout. Radiation expert Klaus Bunnenberg is curious as to what remains of the destructive force that swept across the island over 50 years ago. Once again, Jim Aykroyd has volunteered to help the scientist collect samples of the ground sediment.
The shovel and get as much sediment in here and close it.
It will be full. Good.
The Bravo explosion instantly evaporated 3 small islands. The remains rained back down and covered the floor of the crater with mud and debris. Yet even here, nature is starting to reclaim its territory. If any radioactivity remains in the crater today, it would be found in the sediment. Klaus Bunnenberg makes sure nothing hazardous has stuck to the divers' gloves.
Okay. So no enhanced radiation, so it's okay.
Okay.
Good. Thank you.
A more thorough analysis of the lagoon samples will happen in Klaus Bunnenberg's lab in Germany.
Okay, looks good.
So far, he's not encountered any worrisome levels of radioactivity. Decades of ocean currents have washed most of it away. What is the state of the island itself? Klaus Bunnenberg is keen to find out why the Bikinians who returned had such high cesium-137 levels in their bodies in the 1970s. Carefully, he scans the ground for increased levels of radioactivity. On the beach and the island interior, Klaus's radiation meter does not detect any unusual levels. Then, in the cemetery, the radiation meter suddenly comes to life. Here, the readings are 10 times higher than anywhere else on the island. This is a startling result. But high readings in a rarely visited graveyard couldn't explain why the islanders had such high levels of cesium in their bodies. Klaus suspects that the problem lies elsewhere. If walking on Bikini's surface is not a problem, the Bikinians must have been exposed to cesium in another way. On Bikini, palm trees provide a staple fruit: coconuts. They don't appear to be radioactive on the outside, but the radioecologist has a sneaking suspicion. And he returns to his lab in Hanover, Germany, armed with plenty of samples from Bikini Atoll. To Klaus, the expedition to Bikini has been full of surprises.
I was amazed that it was possible to get on land on Bikini. And you can be sure I had my monitor in my hand when I stepped from the boat on Bikini, because I was expecting much higher levels of radioactivity and higher doses.
To get more specific readings, Klaus Bunnenberg and his assistants subject the Bikini samples to a battery of tests. The analysis confirms 12 years of nuclear testing have left little radiation behind. Bikini is largely safe to live on, except for one problem.
We found the highest cesium contents in the coconut milk, slightly lower in the coconut meat. But both components contain more cesium than would be acceptable for a daily diet.
The reason for this has to do with another chemical element: potassium. All living things, including humans, absorb potassium from soil or plants.
Cesium and potassium are chemically and biochemically very similar. So in cases where there is a shortage of potassium, organisms pick up cesium instead.
The cesium hides too deep in the soil to pose a danger to the world above. But when it's absorbed by plants, it makes its way into the food chain. In the 70s, the Bikinians were unaware of this problem, which has not been solved until today. Nature has been resilient enough to survive the most dangerous weapon on the planet. And yet, 50 years after the end of the nuclear tests on Bikini, radiation is still dangerously present in the ecosystem. Nobody knows for sure how this will affect island and marine life in the long run. Marine biologist Luis Rocha has joined the expedition after he'd heard about a mysterious mutant shark with a strange birth defect.
We're not exactly sure that it's radiation, but we suspect there's a strange mutation in the population because many of them are missing the second dorsal fin. So most sharks, or all of those species of sharks, they're characterized by having two dorsal fins. The nurse sharks here in Bikini and in other places in the Marshall Islands, they have only the first dorsal, they're missing the second dorsal. So we think that it may be some kind of mutation-related defect.
The mysterious fish had been sighted at Bikini's notorious Shark Pass. The crew hopes to attract as many sharks as possible, but this also increases the danger for the divers.
Feeding the sharks there's a debate whether it's good or bad. It makes them think differently than they would normally think. For the divers, it's very, very exciting to see the sharks feeding. You just have to be very careful not to throw the food too close to the divers, or the sharks will think the divers are part of the food.
Luis decides it's worth the risk. Excited by the presence of the divers, the sharks come dangerously close. Soon the situation relaxes, and it becomes clear that these sharks are docile and mean no harm. But while there are plenty of grey reef sharks, no nurse sharks are to be seen.
Nice dive, a lot of sharks. Unfortunately, no nurses. We stayed 40 minutes, and no nurse sharks showed up. They don't like us.
On an earlier expedition to Bikini, a Brazilian camera team had more luck in finding the elusive creature. Their recording is a rare document of the mysterious nurse sharks missing their second dorsal fin. But could this mutation really be linked to the nuclear testing series that took place on Bikini over 50 years ago?
Radiation causes mutation in many animals. The thing is, after the first generation, the mutations, they usually disappear, so the population comes back to normal. In this case, the lack of the second dorsal fin seems to not have any negative effect in the nurse sharks, so it would be the first documented case of such mutation persisting through time.
Luis believes that radiation might have caused a tiny gene alteration in the shark's DNA. Normally, such severe mutations disappear after one generation, but in this unique case, the altered genes may have been passed on. This theory remains hotly disputed, but if it proves to be true, it would be the first documented case of such a mutation in the world. Nature has an enormous regenerative power. Bikini Lagoon is home to an incredible variety of animal species, largely due to the absence of humans. Nature takes back its own. In the waters off Bikini, even the last traces of its atomic testing history will soon drift away. The decaying ghost fleet. For naval historian Steve Wiper, the ship graveyard on the bottom of the lagoon is a magical place. And he knows the significance of documenting the wrecks one last time before they're lost forever.
The Bikini wrecks are definitely a kind of a living history, as we can actually see the ships in their process of decay. It's really a great thing that the Bikini people have preserved this as a living museum. What is it?
But before he leaves, there's one last wreck Steve wants to see. The Japanese battleship Nagato. It was one of the most powerful battleships of its time, and to Americans, Nagato holds an infamous place in history.
Nagato was the Imperial Japanese Navy fleet flagship with the Admiral Yamamoto as Commander-in-Chief of the Japanese Navy at the time. From the bridge of Nagato, Admiral Yamamoto ordered the attack to begin on Pearl Harbor, thus thrusting the United States into war in World War II.
The surprise attack by the Japanese on the naval base at Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, 1941, left America in shock. It was the day the country realized that it was not invulnerable. The sinking of Nagato during Operation Crossroads was a late revenge for the disgrace at Pearl Harbor. But even as a rusting wreck, Nagato maintains a powerful presence.
Just the sheer size of Nagato is awesome to look upon, you know, because the fact that she's capsized, you can see the propellers and the rudders and the massiveness of the propellers is just incredible to see. You know, they're 20, 21 feet in diameter.
Nagato was the first battleship in the world to be equipped with these 16.1-inch guns. They could shoot at targets up to 24 miles away. When the ship arrived at Bikini, it was already heavily damaged from the war. Still, it took 2 atom bombs to sink it. After the Baker test, Nagato stayed afloat for 4 more days, and then quietly sank in the middle of the night. When the ship glided down into the lagoon, it capsized, burying its bridge underneath its massive hull.
To give us a better idea on the bridge structure, we have this drawing. So you can see basically from this level all the way down to somewhere about here.
Yes.
It was here that Admiral Yamamoto gave the order to attack Pearl Harbor, a moment which changed the world forever. Besides being a sensational sight, the wrecks of Operation Crossroads are symbols of a disturbing chapter in history.
The fact that the ships have all been sunk by atomic weapons that were tested here during Operation Crossroads shows you the power of the weapons. What a lot of people don't realize is what radiation can do, but looking at all the data in the ships and reading the reports as to how the radiation affected the ships it's scary.
The ghost fleet of Bikini Atoll is a unique part of our world heritage. A reminder of an age of atomic testing that started here, on Bikini Atoll. When the American military first arrived in 1946, they intended to turn their new weapon into something good for mankind. Yet today, the Bikinian natives are still waiting to return to their home. Eventually, nature will regenerate, and Bikini will return to being the paradise it once was. The ghost fleet will rust away and turn to dust. The expedition to Bikini Atoll was probably the last chance to document these relics of one of the most spectacular experiments in world history, Operation Crossroads.